Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Buddy Box to our session today. It's been a minute, and we are so excited to have Elizabeth with us today, and she's just going to introduce herself and get into the talk of the day, which is caring without breaking. Birdie Box, first of all, is a platform for people living with dementia, for carers who are struggling, and for people who need information and some support. We also have a mobile application where people living with dementia can invite their family and friends onto the platform to upload like photos and music on their behalf. So today we are excited and we have a short time with Elizabeth. So every time is very important to us, and we treasure her for coming onto the platform today. I'm just going to hand over to you, Elizabeth, if you could please introduce yourself and yeah, take it on from there.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. I'm Elizabeth Miller. I'm coming to you from the United States in the state of Georgia, outside of the city of Atlanta. And I have been a caregiver for a dozen or so years. It's hard to put a start time on it because I've always been exposed or been a caregiver in some way. I have an older brother who was born with an intellectual and developmental disability and is on the autism spectrum. And then my parents have had chronic comorbidities my entire adult life. But I will say that things really started to escalate in 2014, where my family calls that the spiral year, because we just felt like we were spiraling out of control. My folks were in and out of the hospital. My mom, we thought, we were going to lose her at some point. And then she miraculously recovered, which was amazing. And then my dad ended up getting sick and passed away in the summer of 2014, while we were also taking care of my mother-in-law, who later passed away in December of that year. And at that point, I became the primary caregiver for my mom. We moved them from their dream home in Florida to Georgia. And I was working full-time in the peak of my career and earning years. So was my husband. He was in sales. So if he's not working, he's not making money. And our kids were in middle school, they were in travel sports. So we were really feeling overwhelmed by everything that was on our plate. Certainly that, was not a trained caregiver in any way. I spent my career in IT and really felt like I was lost. And why is this so hard? Why is it so hard to take care of the people that we love? So I started my business, Happy Healthy Caregiver. Can learn more about that at happyhealthycaregiver.com. And what it does is it provides education, support, and resources for family caregivers, because I felt like I was so invisible while caring for other people that I really wanted to create something that was going to specifically support family caregivers. Because when our loved one gets a diagnosis, I feel like we also get a diagnosis as caregivers, where we are, it's completely uprooted our life, and we've maybe put some things on hold, and for a while we may have put our health and happiness on hold. And what I found is that that's not sustainable, that a solo caregiving I've never seen it work in the 10 years that I've been doing this business. I primarily am a professional speaker, but I do some coaching for caregivers, and I have a podcast called Happy Healthy Caregiver and a weekly newsletter that I invite you to join so that we can continue to stay connected after today. So Birdie Box had asked me to put together they collected some questions from the community, and we are going to be talking today. I'm going to be sharing some tips with you about our topic is caring without breaking, setting boundaries while staying present. And this is really important, because what I found as a caregiver is that it's not like, it impacts every part of our life, right? Like it's not really something that just happens in certain sections of our day. And so we do have to set boundaries, and we do have to be intentional to stay present in that. So I had to learn that the hard way. I definitely experienced caregiver burnout, and then had to claw my way back to feeling like a happy and healthy caregiver again. Say that it's not necessarily a destination, but it's something that we continue to work on. Boundaries are essential to having our journey as family caregivers become sustainable. This is not a selfish thing. This is a smart thing. It's a smart thing to do. It not only helps the people that we're caring for and the other responsibilities that we have, but it helps us so that we're not deteriorating in any way and needing, adding to that care situation and maybe making that situation worse. So some of the questions that we got are weaving into how I've structured what I'm sharing with you today. We're going to be talking about why boundaries matter. We're going to be talking about how to communicate with some limits and how to deal with some emotions that are tough, like resentment and guilt. We're going to talk a little bit about realistic self-care, but I do whole presentations for companies and communities and faith communities and areas and aging and so forth about those topics. And then handling resistance to boundaries. You're going to, just because you set a boundary doesn't mean that people are going to respect them. So what do you do then? And then how do we rebuild our identity beyond caregiving? And if we have time for questions, we'll certainly try to address a couple of those. You feel free. I don't know if there's a chat situation, but you can certainly pop those in and make it interactive that way. And then I know that they'll stay on afterwards, and they can maybe address some of those things. So why do boundaries matter in caregiving? First of all, quick definition of a boundary is it's an emotional, a physical, and a mental limit that we set as individuals to protect our own well-being. So it is something that's within our control. One of the things that I keep on my desk is the serenity prayer. So God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom that I know the difference. And that is a reminder about how boundaries are important. And it's a quick little micro thing that we can do to remember that. There is a huge cost to not setting a boundary. I mentioned that I had some emotional and physical burnout, the resentment and anger, and just the loss of our own identity. And we deserve to be healthy and happy as individuals. Boundaries help us stay present, and they allow us to be compassionate longer, which is a big part of what we're doing as family caregivers, frankly. And it's a tool. It's a tool that's going to allow us, again, to make caregiving sustainable. And you're going to hear me say that word sustainable a long time, because we can kind of do something gritty for the short term. But in order for this to be something that, the average caregiver is a caregiver for 4.5 years, we've got to figure out a way that we're not going to completely deplete ourselves in that 4.5 years and then not recognize who we are at the end of that. And again, that's just the average. It could certainly be longer than that. So next, I want to talk to you about communicating limits to the family without guilt. One of the things I've noticed about could be an inkling of that we need a boundary in place for ourselves is to take notice of the situations in our caregiving life, in our work life, our family life, that makes us angry, that makes us resentful, that makes us frustrated, because those types of emotions could be a signal and a sign that we need to maybe think about what kind of boundary we can put in place to, again, protect ourselves, our mental and our emotional well-being. So how do we do that, right? Easier said than done. How do we communicate these limits to family and not feel guilty about it? One of the important ways to do that through words is to use what I call I statements. I feel ... when this happens, or I need help with ... I'm feeling overwhelmed when, different things. Nobody can take those I statements away from you, whereas if you flip that and make it more of a you statement, you're definitely going to put people on the defensive. The other thing about boundaries is you've got to be specific about them. You got to define what they are, or how you need help, or what you need to be true in a certain situation. Be specific around the time, the specific task, the emotional support, and how you're feeling in that. And I think, being vulnerable is a huge part of having people understand where you're coming from. And you certainly want to frame it in a way that it's inclusive, letting people know that we're a care partnership here with your carer, your care recipient, and that you are an important part of this care team, and I am part of this care team as well. And I need you to meet me halfway on this. And so let them know that they're part of it, that they're part of the bigger picture. But we do have to prepare for some pushback, right? Some of them are not going to be understanding about what we need. And that's okay, right? That's their right to feel that way. But the boundary is still necessary for you. Sometimes we can communicate without actually saying anything. You know, one way to communicate is to walk away. An example of that is, I had a boundary with my mom. I had a great relationship with my mom, but she certainly knew where my Achilles heel was and how to get a reaction out of me. And she would have what I later termed her greatest hits album, going through all of the things in the past that she didn't like or could have been done differently. And I truly believe as caregivers, we're making the best decisions with the information that we have at that time. And it used to frustrate me that I just was like, okay, here we go. Track 1, track 2, we're going through the greatest hits album. And then I finally realized that I have a choice. I can walk away and I don't have to listen to it. And so I would let my mom know, like, Mom, we're going to talk about the present and the future. I'm not here to necessarily rehash the past of what we went done. I'm happy to find a counselor or something else for you for that. But I would walk away. And that was certainly an example of a boundary. So another boundary, my parents are deceased, sadly now, my mother-in-law deceased, but I'm still a caregiver for my brother, along with my siblings. And so one of the things that used to frustrate and annoy me is, I work full time and he would call me repeatedly. If I didn't answer, he would just keep calling, and as part of his disability, perhaps, very impulsive. And I would tell him, I can't answer, I'm at work. I might be on a live call like right now. And so, but I will see that you called and I will call you later. And building trust around that boundary with him of actually following through with that was really important. And I'm not going to say it never happens, but it certainly happens way less than it used to by setting that boundary. There's a great boundary book, and maybe this could be added to the chat, but it's called Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. And I have a link for it too. I can, after I'm done talking, I can go back and put that in there. But I will say it's got a little bit of Christian references, so I want to call that out to you. But this was a book that was recommended to me by a coworker who I was complaining to about my frustrations. And he said, maybe you need to read this book. Maybe this book could help you. And I did find it very helpful. Let's talk about the emotions, the yucky emotions, of dealing with resentment and guilt. Very normal to feel this way. And I want to normalize it. Feeling resentful doesn't mean that you don't love or respect this person. We need to talk to other family caregivers, I feel like, who get it. And that's the importance of communities like these, communities like Happy Healthy Caregiver. I'm also part of a nonprofit called daughterhood.org that offers virtual support sessions for family caregivers, complimentary virtual support sessions. So that's another resource for you all. But talking to other caregivers really helps normalize this. So we feel less guilty. We feel less resentful when we can kind of let things out and let things go. And again, these guilt and these emotions are signals. They're not verdicts. They're showing us that some kind of need is being unmet. Guilt while caregiving is very natural. And that's because we want to be all the things to all the people and all the things that are demanding of us. But it's not realistic and sustainable to think that we can show up perfectly, in all these different situations. We're one person. And so when the guilt comes up, it's important to give ourselves some grace around that. Some strategies with dealing with resentment and guilt, we talked about, finding support, seeing the emotion and maybe knowing that there's a boundary that might need to be placed, but naming that feeling without judgment. I'm feeling resentful, I'm feeling guilty. Journaling about it. Journaling was a big part of my journaling journey, especially early on with caregiving. I needed a way to process it. And so I wrote this book called the Just For You Daily Self-Care Journal. That's a prompted journal because I wanted people to try on journaling to see if it was a fit for them. This is written with caregivers in mind, but it's really a tool to help you prioritize your own health and happiness. And you can journal, in lots of different ways. This is one way. And then reframing is another strategy. One of my friends, she said, Elizabeth, you need to feel the feels. And, you saying you're fine is not a feeling either. But feeling your emotions is a very healthy and honest thing to do. And if you don't address these feelings in some way, what typically happens is they come up in non-healthy ways. Your body's going to physically tell you, or your mind's going to physically tell you. And, dealing with those up front and really recognizing them is going to be a proactive way to really avoid some of those bigger things or those unhealthy habits that can come, as far as addictions and so forth. And then we want to practice self-compassion, talk to yourself just like you would your dear friend. There's a great podcast episode. So the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast spotlights real family caregivers sharing their stories and their tips, because I don't necessarily have all the answers, but I love to kind of fast track the community to what might work for them. So one of the interviews I did on this topic was with a caregiver and an expert named Karen Anderson. And we go deep into healthy boundaries and creating an intentional caregiving identity. And I'll link to that maybe in the chat afterwards too. But we also discussed maybe when estrangement might be the right option, and how to break these unhealthy cycles to help heal your trauma. Not everybody is a nice person to take care of. We come into those situations. So how do we handle resistance to our boundaries? And this was addressing one of the questions that we got is, when your person you're caring for, your caree or your carer, or care recipient, as I call them, is pushing back. First thing we do is say, we recognize it. We show some empathy, but we're firm with it. And we say, I understand you're upset. And I still need to step away for a bit. So kind of a reminder about the boundary. I understand how you're feeling here, but I need to step away for a bit. We got to be consistent, just like with those of you who are parents for young kids, you got to kind of, keep reiterating the same rules and the same boundaries over and over again, because they're going to test them and your care recipient's also going to test them. So staying calm, repeating that, because again, they know where the Achilles heel and they know how to get those reactions out of you. And the thing that's in your control is to not react the way that they're expecting you to react. And again, that whole serenity prayer, what's in your control and what's not. You can use visual cues sometimes. So you can use, schedules to help with boundaries. You can use visual reminders of that things are happening. Some examples of that in my life where, I had a boundary with my kids that after 9 p.m. at night, mom was off duty. And so if they needed some kind of information from me, a paper signed, something to prepare to take to school the next day when they were in school years, they needed to tell me before 9 p.m. at night because I was off duty. And so again, sometimes it would get tested and I'd be like, remember, we talked about this, and certainly they're at the age where they can respect that boundary. And they have the cognitive ability to do that. Another thing is for, in caregiving, my sister had a boundary with my mom. So later my mom moved in with my sister and she said, she was off duty before 7 a.m, unless it was a dire emergency. Sometimes my mom would call my sister on her iPad or something. She said, Mom, I need 1 cup of coffee and I just need a little quiet time for myself before I'm on duty. This is like a job and I need to kind of be well rested and be in the right frame of mind to go into it. Sometimes it was like little things too. My mom used to give us, she had to use breathing treatments for her COPD. And she used to always, take her mask off too early and so forth. So setting a timer helped with that breathing treatment. She could see it and be like, okay, this is 10 minutes. I'm not making up what 10 minutes is. I'm not trying to fool you here. This is a clock. This is a factual thing that's going to keep time for us. And so that really helped kind of get that together. So those are some ideas of some visual things that you can do and say. And then we talked about kind of that empathy, the validating the feelings without changing your boundary, right? But validating how they're feeling. How do we take care of ourselves, while we're caring for other people? Like this is a whole other kind of topic on its own, but I do want to it's important to me to kind of leave you some realistic self-care practices. And what I found is that self-care as a caregiver looks really different than what it looked like before I was a family caregiver and in the throes of all of that. So I needed to kind of re-explore and try on different things, just like we're trying on clothes to see what works best for us. I also found that, I had to be really creative. And sometimes these little micro acts of self-care really made an impactful difference in my day. So even 5 minutes can count, right? You can do some breath work in 5 minutes. You could do some stretching. You could text a friend. You could go, to a funny YouTube channel and get kind of uplifted that way. You could pet your animals. You could sit outside in nature. You could sing a song or do a quick dance. And again, you can kind of refer to that serenity prayer and have a moment there. And then once you kind of get in the habit of doing these micro acts, you can start to stack them, or you can pair them in what I call a twofer, taking two things and pairing them together to kind of use your time wisely. So some examples of that is to do deep breathing and breathing exercises, maybe while you're washing the dishes or you're sitting at a red light. You could listen to a podcast, while you're running errands or doing, housework. You could catch up with a friend, either on the phone or in person while you're doing a walk outside. So there's a lot of way we can get these twofers or these buy one, get ones. And then I think, we've got to kind of do an audit of what really, because it's personal self-care, what's going to work for you is work different for me and other people. So we've got to know what restores us. And what I call self-care is anything that's going to energize me physically or mentally, anything that's going to give me peace of mind, or is just pure joy. And so knowing what those things are that can restore you quickly. I interviewed somebody on my podcast who did the ice roller. That was the cold therapy was really something that energized her. Maybe for you, it's music. Maybe it is movement. Maybe it's humor. And so trying on things to know kind of what your toolbox of stuff are, and you might need things on different days. And then giving yourself permission. I think we think that we've got this one and only job to take care of this other human, but we have another job, the responsibility, frankly, that we were born with, and that is to take care of ourselves and to be responsible human beings there. And so we don't have to wait for a big break in order to get this respite that we need. We can do, again, these tiny daily micro acts to reset. But then sometimes we do need to plan for those bigger recharge moments and those refills, just like your car maintenance, right? You might need a little quick fill up here and there, but then you need to kind of take it in to get the tires rotated, the brake pads changed, and things like that, so that the bigger maintenance things can happen. So how do we rebuild identity besides, outside of caregiving? I want to, invite you to think about exploring your pre-caregiver interests, or maybe even brand new interests. Reading, for example, was something that I really missed while I was caregiving. I just felt like when I pulled the book out at night, that's when I used to read, I would quickly fall asleep, and I missed that. But then I figured I could incorporate reading through audiobooks. And so that was when I got my library card, joined the Libby app, and really explored the world of audiobooks, or Audible is a great resource for that. And I could do that while I was driving or getting ready in the morning. And those are habits that I still maintain today. And then you can come up with new ideas, new hobbies. Maybe you want to take an online course. Maybe you want to join some kind of a fun social group that could be online. We do something in our Happy Healthy Caregiver community and my family called the 20 for 25 list. And these aren't things like resolutions where we're losing weight or anything like that, but it's fun things, maybe trying a new recipe, a new restaurant. One of the things on my list is that I wanted to learn how to play Mahjong. And that's been something that I've recently learned to play, and I've been playing with some girlfriends, which is super fun. Playing golf, seeing live music, buying myself flowers, trying a new workout class. So things that are interesting to me, and again, they might be different for you, but for these are fun things, enjoyable things, and some take more time than others. But affirming that you are a caregiver, and yet you are much more than a caregiver as well. Caregiving is something that you do. It's not everything that you do. It's a season of your life. And we want to prepare ourselves for the end of that season at some point, and want to be able to still feel like we're not starting over and rebuilding something from there. So how can we kind of maintain some of these things and then, explore those later? It's been really cool to see my older sister cared for my mom. So I cared for my mom for a couple of years, and then my sister cared for my mom in her home for the last 4 years of my mom's life. So big part of her day. But after caregiving ended for my mom, it was wonderful to kind of see my sister explore different changes in things that were interesting to her. So she started playing golf. She worked in a golf pro shop. She started back her art. And these were things that she had kind of kept up a little bit here and there during caregiving, but then really exploded after she ends. Now she's knitting and reading and gardening and traveling and doing, lots of things there. So I think, I want to kind of wrap us up so we can answer a question or two, and I have time to kind of put some links in the chat. But I want to reiterate that boundaries are very healthy. And the goal is to have our caregiving life be a loving, healthy life and a sustainable life for us, that it's not that drudgery. We get one life to live, and you get to live your life just as much as the person that you're caring for. So, as a closing kind of affirmation, like, I care deeply and I care for myself too. Two things can be true at the same time. I believe that in my core, and I want you to hopefully believe that too. And again, I'd want to stay connected. I'll share the links for a couple of things with you, and would love to just kind of see if there's anything else I can share today that we didn't address.
Wow, thank you very much. Wow. I feel like you've shared a lot with us, and yeah, like, we're just gonna take all this information. And this meeting is being recorded, so we are going to share it on our social media pages for everyone who would like to rewatch or would like to share with someone that really needs this support. So yeah, I do have one question in the chat room. Please, if anyone has any questions, please drop it in.
And I'm going to add some links too while you're talking here.
Yes, please. So we've shared the links to get to Elizabeth. So everything is in the chat room. Please have a look at the chat room, and we are also going to take some of this information and put it into the comment section of the post that we put on social media. So one question that I have here is, how do you suggest dealing with caregiver burnout when taking time off isn't an immediate option? Elizabeth?
Sorry, I think I'm there now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's real, right? I mean, hopefully you get to resources like ours before you're burned out, to be proactive about it. But I do think it's a little bit of realizing some of the symptoms, sometimes trusting a friend or a family member. I know for me, my husband was like, you're different, this is happening in my health. My body was telling me, that I was no longer healthy. So there's certainly signs of burnout, and paying attention to those. I think it's easier said than done. And I think that's where it's not like, there's not like a one answer I can share, but it is a way to doing these micro acts, setting a boundary as part of self-care, right? So that you can protect yourself that way. Scheduling time, even if it's just, I know getaways and nights on the town are just not realistic for many caregivers. And that is one version of self-care, but that's not the only version of self-care. There are 8 categories of self-care. And that we think a lot about physical self-care. We think about eating right and exercising and maybe even sleep. But it's social self-care, getting, communicating with friends. You can do that virtually on Zoom. You can do that through FaceTiming and so forth. You can certainly schedule weekends away and nights out too, if that's accessible to you. There's, financial self-care. Again, that maybe there's things that need to happen to put in place to give you peace of mind. Intellectual self-care. How can you learn about things so that you can make your life more sustainable and have more systems in place? Professional, like what can you do to set yourself up for success in that way? So it's not just physical, and I really want people to think about and try on the clothing, and follow, and be engaged in communities out there, so that you're going to get the best advice from other family caregivers who are living it. Nobody's going to understand that more than a caregiver. So the best day to find support is on your best day. and not to wait until you're in a crisis mode with your hair on fire and in the deep end drowning in the swimming pool. Like, we want to see these things coming, because likely in most situations, people are continuing to decline and not necessarily bounce back from health. Maybe you're doing a short-term caregiving thing, and that's a different. But in most cases, it's going to get harder. And so we've got to really set ourselves up for success that way.
Yes, that is very, very true. Yeah, we really appreciate. Do you have time for one more question, please? This
Yeah.
came, so this question, it came in before the session. So the question was, I have a problem with control. How do I set boundaries for others to respect when I have put everything in place and I know where everything is and other people? Oh God. Yeah. So the
So they
person
have control
asking,
issues. They
yes,
want to, nobody's going to do it as well as you're going to do it, right? It's
yes,
so true. Um, and I will also say nothing is going to change unless you make the effort to kind of make the change, right? That's the definition of an insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results there. So it's hard. It's none of this is easy necessarily. But I will say sometimes pick something that is less important to you. You know, there's a lot in our world that we've got to take care of, right? Sometimes it's the actual hands-on care type of stuff, but sometimes it's the other stuff, the laundry, the grocery shopping, the meal prep, the landscaping, the walking the dog, the taking the people to doctor's appointments. So pick the things that are really important to you to care about and keep those, you know, if that's and but also know that something, you know, you can get sick. I'm getting over, you know, a sinus infection myself. So things happen to us, and it's kind of irresponsible, frankly, to not put a backup plan in place. So we need to kind of test those things out. So even if you think that you're never going to use a home care agency or need some kind of backup care, I would recommend that you at least go through and get the assessment done, so that you are on somebody's paperwork, where because they have to come out and kind of assess before they can never send anybody out. And so again, you don't want to be in this crisis situation. Like, how can you get there? And maybe you don't need it today, but you're going to need it next week. And so being proactive and doing these little baby steps ahead of time is going to make you breathe easier, you know, when you're really feeling it. And then getting help with some of those things that are less important or exterior to care can kind of free you up then to do more of the things that you feel are the important things for you to do. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. And I don't know if some of you are working caregivers as well, but we're really good at this at work, right? We're really good at managing projects and putting people with the strengths on the projects and figuring out what their strengths and weaknesses are, understanding where we have gaps. Sometimes we have to go outside and get external help for those things. Same is true for caregiving. Like, it's not realistic to think that we can do this one massive long-term project all by ourselves, that we need a team of support in order to do that. I get it. I love to have the reins and I love to, you know, feel like I'm in control, but what is really in our control? Like, it's kind of a myth, frankly. And I feel like caregiving was a huge lesson in learning how to let go, and it being a really, really healthy thing to be able to let go. I also saw the newsletter link was broken, so let me go ahead and put that in here. Hopefully that will work there. Subscribe to newsletter. Anything else? Okay, yeah, Happy Healthy Caregiver. You can listen to the podcast on the website, or you can listen on your favorite podcast platform, YouTube, Spotify, and so forth.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Like, this has really been amazing. We are going to share all the links, the video recording on our platforms, and please do reach out to Elizabeth as well if you need if you need to join the newsletter, if you need anything. Thank you so much. Please
Thank
do
you for
reach out to us. Yeah, thank you
thank
so
you for having me. Thank you. Thank you so
It's been
much. I
a
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And yeah, we look forward to having more of you on the platform. Thank you,
Thank you
Elizabeth.
so much. You guys
Yeah,
are amazing. Take care of you.
yeah. Cheers. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now. Bye bye. Thank you. Thank you.